She walks from the door to the bookcase. From the bookcase, she turns around and goes back to the door. From the door, she returns to the bookcase. From the bookcase, she goes to the table. From the table, she goes to the window. From the window, she finally returns to the door. That's one whole circuit. Once back at the door, she repeats the circuit, but faster. Door to bookcase, bookcase to door, door to bookcase. From bookcase to table, table to window, window to door. Then again. Door, bookcase, bookcase, door, door, bookcase, bookcase, table, table, window, window, door, and so on. All her journeys are identical. Every time she makes the second return to the bookcase, she bends down and touches it. And each time she's at the window, she presses her forehead onto the glass. She looks ahead expectantly and sees nothing in the dark exterior. There is nothing ahead. She steps away from the window and moves back to the door. That's the entire choreography of her circuit. She goes again, but this time is different. Rather than advancing by foot, she decides instead to remain by the door. And from here, she'll think her way through the journey. During this period of motionlessness, she sees herself repeatedly pacing backwards from the bookcase. And it's this persistent retreat that remains unexplained. Why walk backwards? Why at this point? She imagines a line is tracing her journey. The line travels straight from the door across to the bookcase, which is on the opposite side of the room. Then a shorter line connects the bookcase to the table on the adjacent wall, followed by a long diagonal line that crosses the first one in order to reach the window, which is on the same wall as the door. So finally, there's a second short line back to the starting point. As the second long line intersects the first, the resultant shape looks like two triangles joined at their tips to form a bow. She turns the shape over in her mind. It's not just a bow, it's an X. And the point at which its lines intersect is directly in front of the bookcase. Something about the encounter with the shelf is irregular. The shelf. Does she bend down to touch it? She goes again in her mind, back and forth between the door and the bookcase. Then yes, she bends down, and it's the getting up from bending that makes her stumble slightly and reverse into the table before she moves forwards and sees the nothing in front of her at the window. None of what follows would occur if it wasn't for the bending. And she now realizes her movements have each time been accompanied by a destabilizing realization. The bookcase is empty, lying on its side horizontally along the floor. She waits by the door, ruminating. Door, bookcase, bookcase, door, door, bookcase, bookcase, table, table, window, window, door. A lot has taken place in the past between these items of furniture, mainly arguments with him. The room was differently orientated then. The whole dynamic of the space has been changed. That's it. Before he left. Before he left, he knocked the bookcase over, then he emptied the shelves and took all their books. An ineffective gesture, because his second action cancels the effect of his first one. His removal of the books nullifies the need for a properly orientated bookcase. She continues to think through the material conditions of the room. Door, bookcase, bookcase door, door, bookcase, bookcase table, table, window, window, door. And amidst these things, the object that she created, the enormous X formed at the centre of her path. She walks through the space, then she stops. So. The flattening was partly about the fact that all three stories involve some sort of flattening in them, whether it's a sort of the gradual compression of this text into a single line, or in that gallery there's a sort of compressed perspective through to a scenario, and you see sort of horizon line on the wall that you're looking through. And then in that one, Reality Flickers, there's a story that's written, that's a confession that's squashed up. The character's crunched up in her hand, and to try and hide it, to try and hide her confession, she's slipped it under the gap between, that's underneath the locker doors, and it's a sort of narrow gap. And she slips this sheet of paper underneath it, and then her confession sort of inhabits this space of the locker. So that's partly why it's got flattening, but also because of the way I tend to think of stories sort of trapped in the flattened space of a book, and how they might emerge to become a spatialised narrative in the gallery. I spent time on the island of Portland looking at the stone and considering the island itself as a kind of carved sculptural form, because it's sort of pitted by quarries. And so I've revisited one of the characters from that book, and I've thought about what he's thinking about now. And so I've wrote this new story based on that character. He's a gravedigger on Portland. Because the text is about him digging down into the stone and thinking about the layers, the stratification of stone underground, and then he's thinking about how everything that's expanded in the present moment will in hundreds of millions of years' time be all compressed down to form some layer of stone in the future. So I'm sort of repeating that formally across the wall. Yeah, there are things that come from the story, so they're sort of expanded out, and I'm looking at other objects that relate back to the gravedigger. So this is what the quarryman's daughters, who are characters in the book, were wearing on the day that they spoke about seeing the gravedigger. So it's things like that link in to this particular narrative. Yeah.
Reality Flickers at once showed her world.
So this is the text about Reality Flickers, who's the character, and it's, as I was sort of mentioned before, that it talks about how she wrote this confession and crunched it up and slipped it under the door into there. The events that she was confessing are in the audio that's playing in there.
Seeing her flush.
So one of the things I was looking at was sort of boundaries and the sort of marking of grounds and demarcations, and how spaces that you're not supposed to enter, or you sort of feel that, or that the characters, perhaps this character feels is protected, and she feels safe, should be safe, but then we go in and listen to her confession.
Objects drew her thoughts into a narrative that connected her to them and them.
I'm interested in how these things, really ordinary, everyday things, can be brought into an artwork and become works of art. or can slip back again into the everyday. So there's this movement, and I've approached that from the perspective of someone who's trained as a sculptor, where there's always an uncertainty about objects and their status and whether they're works of art or not. You know, they can easily be looked at as completely ordinary. For me, that is really crucial, that things might suddenly be dismissed as ordinary, and that feels like their existence as art is at stake.
And down it goes, gloopy and too large at first, slow, then quick, with its tail of optic nerves in pursuit.
I suppose in the beginning, to be honest, I did start because I wanted to try and get my voice into the room. I don't do all my own reading. Sometimes I work with actors and so on. But yeah, these two pieces are me. I've put effects on things when I can't bear to listen to my voice and just sort of, but it's often easier for me to direct myself rather than, I can make lots of changes and things and get myself to read it again. It's really just practical more than anything.
The campaign to gain her confidence had been an intriguing...
I think I tend to start with either an object or a site, and then I think about, what sort of character would be shaped by living in this, like on this unstable territory of Portland, for example. What sort of people are going to live on this ground where there's holes all around, or this massive locker. What kind of stories could I sort of shape around that? What sort of massive confession would need to fill that? I wanted it to be something that's unstable and slightly incoherent in that sense. That's something, again, it's sort of really obviously a construction in a gallery. It's not pretending to be a real room. And I think that's partly for it to be working in a bit like with a book of fiction, where it's made up.
Layers of melamine and formaldehyde. A goat?
There are a few things that are on the audio and they're listed, and then there are other things that aren't there. And part of the point of it is that it's sort of suggestions in your ear, directly into your ear. So you're looking around some of the things you see, and there's things that obviously can't be there, like the goat. I think I'm really interested in the way that works with reading, how objects are formed. When you read a book, you have this really sort of intimate connection with just the words on this page, and somehow you form objects in your mind, a whole scenario, a whole imaginative landscape opens up in your mind, and I'm really kind of interested in how that happens just from this.
Something I don't have a word for.
Pattern of the Formica style.
My voice.
Sky.